The studio lights blazed, illuminating the sleek, modern set of late-night Spotlight, where Fiona Carrington ruled with sharp wit and an unapologetically progressive stance. Her audience adored her for it. Night after night, they tuned in to watch her dismantle public figures with biting humor and relentless critiques. She was the queen of late-night television, a fearless commentator who thrived on controversy. But tonight, something was different. There was an unmistakable tension in the air, a crackling energy that even the most seasoned members of her production team could sense. Because tonight, Fiona wasn't going up against just any guest. She was facing Clint Eastwood. It had started as a casual suggestion in a production meeting. One of her producers floated the idea of inviting Eastwood, the Hollywood legend whose tough guy image and conservative views made him a polarizing figure in modern media. The room had buzzed with excitement and skepticism. Would he accept? Would he even care? Fiona had grinned at the idea. Not only would it be a ratings boost, but it was also an opportunity to expose what she considered outdated ideals. Eastwood was a relic of a bygone era, a man who had built his career on playing hardened cowboys and lone vigilantes. In her mind, he represented an old-school masculinity that was no longer relevant. This wasn't just an interview. It was a showdown. She prepared meticulously. Clips of his movies and past interviews played on her laptop as she scribbled notes. She smirked as she imagined the moment she would counter his classic measured delivery with her razor-sharp retorts. She wasn't going to just interview him. She was going to challenge him, make him defend his views before an audience that was all too ready to see him falter. Meanwhile, in Carmel, California, Clint Eastwood sat in the sunlight of his ranch's kitchen, holding a cup of black coffee as he read the invitation. His assistant, Jack, lingered nearby, waiting for his reaction. "Are you sure about this, Clint?" Jack asked cautiously. Fiona Carrington's show isn't exactly friendly territory. Eastwood gave a faint smile, his weathered face betraying neither irritation nor apprehension. "Friendly or not, a conversation's a conversation," he said simply. "People can say what they want. Doesn't change the truth." Jack frowned, shifting his weight. "She's going to come after you. Hard. Politics, your movies, probably even your age." Eastwood shrugged. "Let her." Jack sighed. He had seen enough of Fiona's interviews to know how merciless she could be. He also knew Eastwood wasn't one for rehearsed comebacks or defensive posturing. The man had built his career on authenticity, for better or worse. The days leading up to the interview were a whirlwind for both parties. Fiona's team crafted questions designed to provoke, ensuring each point was loaded with enough irony and humor to keep the audience engaged. Eastwood, on the other hand, carried on as if nothing unusual was on the horizon. He refused to prepare or script responses, trusting his instincts to carry him through whatever awaited him. When the day arrived, the studio buzzed with anticipation. The audience, a mix of Fiona's loyal fans and curious onlookers, filled the seats, eager to witness what promised to be an electrifying night. Fiona rehearsed her opening lines backstage, her confidence unwavering. This was going to be legendary. In the green room, Eastwood waited, sipping water and exchanging polite nods with crew members. Jack fidgeted beside him, glancing at the monitor displaying the live audience. "Look at that crowd," Jack muttered. "They're eating out of her hand already." Eastwood glanced at the screen, observing Fiona as she stepped onto the stage with her signature swagger. "That's her job," he said simply, leaning back in his chair. "Mine's to tell the truth." On stage, Fiona launched into her monologue, her delivery polished and brimming with energy. She opened with a few lighthearted jokes before pivoting to her guest of the night. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've got a legend in the house tonight," she began, her tone dripping with playful sarcasm. "Clint Eastwood, a Hollywood icon, a symbol of old-school masculinity, and a man who still thinks talking to an empty chair is good entertainment." The audience erupted in laughter. Fiona grinned, pleased with the reaction, and continued with a string of quips about Eastwood's movies, his political views, and his advanced age. Backstage, Eastwood watched with mild amusement, his expression unreadable. Jack, however, shifted uncomfortably. "She's laying it on thick," Jack muttered. Eastwood nodded slightly. "She's doing her job. Let her have her fun." When Fiona finally introduced Eastwood, the applause was mixed. Some cheered, others booed. He walked onto the stage with the quiet confidence that had defined him for decades. He shook Fiona's hand firmly and tipped his hat slightly to the audience, earning a few laughs and scattered claps. "Mr. Eastwood, welcome to the show," Fiona said, her tone light but edged with mockery. "Thanks for having me," Eastwood replied, his voice steady. "Nice crowd you've got here." The tension in the room was almost tangible as Fiona leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. "Oh, they're great," she said smoothly. "They love a good debate. Ready to dive in?" Eastwood smiled faintly. "Always." And with that, the curtain on their verbal duel was officially raised. The studio brimming with the promise of fireworks. Both host and guest were poised, though for entirely different reasons. Fiona was ready to dominate, while Eastwood remained calm, knowing he had nothing to prove. What neither of them knew was just how much the night would change both of them, and spark a conversation that would ripple across the nation. The air in the studio had shifted. Fiona Carrington, usually the master of the conversation, felt something unexpected, a sense of unease. Clint Eastwood, calm as ever, had met her sarcasm with quiet confidence, and now she realized the power balance had started to shift. "So, Clint," Fiona leaned in, crossing her hands together on the desk in front of her. "Your films have always portrayed a very specific kind of masculinity. Tough, relentless, sometimes violent. Do you think that image still holds up in today's world?" The audience murmured in anticipation, expecting Clint to be caught off guard. Instead, he smiled faintly, leaning back in his chair. "The world changes, Fiona," he said. "But people don't change as much as they think. Strength, resilience, knowing when to stand your ground, those things don't go out of style." Fiona smirked, sensing an opening. "But don't you think some of that old-school masculinity has led to some, let's say, problematic attitudes?" A few cheers rippled through the audience, but Clint remained unfazed. "People like to blame the past when they don't want to face the present," he said. "My movies weren't about promoting violence. They were about standing up for something. Sometimes that meant fighting for it." The audience, which had started out firmly on Fiona's side, was now split. She knew she had to regain control. "All right," she said, tapping her fingers against her desk. "But let's be real, Clint. Your political views haven't exactly been subtle. Some say you're out of touch. Others say you represent a generation that refuses to adapt. What do you say to that? Clint chuckled, a deep, knowing sound. You know, Fiona, I've been around a long time, long enough to know that if you try to please everyone, you lose yourself. I say what I believe, and if that makes me unpopular, so be it. I'd rather be honest than be liked. A hush settled over the room. The audience, previously eager to cheer for Fiona's jabs, now sat in contemplative silence. Fiona, for the first time in a long time, felt something rare: uncertainty. She glanced at her producer, who was frantically motioning for her to pivot, but something inside her told her not to. This wasn't the interview she had expected, but maybe, just maybe, it was becoming something more valuable. I have to admit, she said, her voice softer, I didn't think this conversation would go this way. Clint nodded. That's the problem with expectations. They keep you from seeing what's right in front of you. A beat of silence passed before Fiona spoke again. Then let's drop the expectations for a moment. Tell me, Clint, what do you really think about where the world is heading? Clint exhaled slowly, his expression thoughtful. I think the world's moving fast, sometimes too fast. People get so caught up in what's new that they forget to appreciate what's lasting. But progress isn't about throwing everything away. It's about learning from what came before. The audience was silent now, truly listening. Even Fiona felt herself leaning in. That's an interesting perspective, she admitted. Do you think there's hope for bridging the divide? Clint smiled faintly. Hope isn't something you wait for, Fiona. It's something you build. And that starts with conversations like this one. A ripple of applause started from the back of the audience and grew into a wave. Fiona looked around, momentarily stunned. She had invited Clint to be challenged, maybe even humiliated. Instead, he had done something far more impressive. He had made them think. As the applause died down, Fiona turned back to Clint, an undeniable respect in her eyes. Well, Clint, I have to say, you've given me and a lot of people something to consider tonight. Clint tipped his imaginary hat. That's all I ever aimed to do. The camera zoomed in as Fiona took a breath. Ladies and gentlemen, Clint Eastwood. If this conversation made you think, if it challenged you in any way, hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments. Because if there's one thing tonight has proven, it's that real conversations matter. The final applause erupted, not out of spectacle, but out of genuine appreciation. As Clint stood to leave, Fiona extended her hand once more, and this time, it wasn't just for the cameras. He shook it firmly, nodding as if to say, "You did good." As the studio lights dimmed, Fiona sat back in her chair, lost in thought. This was not the interview she had planned, but perhaps it was the one she needed.